Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. Before we begin, I just want to say if you enjoy this video, please give it a like or a thumbs up, and please do subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories like this one or stories about the history of the North East. John William Johnson was hanged in December of 1891 for the murder of Margaret Addison at Hetton-Le-Hole, County Durham, on what was claimed to be her wedding day. In a lot of newspaper articles, he is just referred to as William Johnson, so for the purpose of this story I will call him William, as this seemed to be his preferred name. He had been living in Margaret's house for several years, and although it's unclear if they really were a couple or if he just thought they were, when he discovered that she planned to marry someone else, he lost control and shot her in a fit of jealousy. This is his story. John William Johnson was born in around 1842, possibly in Lincolnshire, and he had previously been married to a lady called Mary Ann. They were married in around 1864, and Mary Ann was possibly around 20 years older than William. According to the 1871 census, William and Mary Ann were living in the Hetton-Le-Hole area, with 4 children, all described as stepchildren in relation to William. I believe that Mary Ann died in around 1880. However, as information is often hard to find, this may not be the correct year. But if anyone listening knows for certain, please do let me know. It's unclear when William moved into the home of Margaret Addison as a lodger, but he does appear on both the 1881 and 1891 census forms as a lodger at her home under the name of William Johnson. The fact that he appears as a lodger on the census forms does not necessarily mean that they were not a couple, as people did not always tell the entire truth. Often they would say they were married when they were not, or did not mention if they were widowed, so this simply may have just been because they did not want everyone to know they were living together but not married. Some news reports say that he had lived there for around 17 years. However, there's no way to prove this, as details between 1871, when he was still living with his wife, and 1881, when he first appears on the census at the home of Margaret Addison, are hard to find, so he may have moved before his wife died. He was described as a general labourer in 1891. However, in some of the newspaper articles about the murder, he is described as being a miner, but it seems this was a previous job prior to him becoming a farm labourer. Margaret Addison was a widow. She was born in around 1843 and had previously been married to John Addison. I have no information of when her husband had died. She had 3 children as of 1871, and 2 of those children were still living with her in 1891, a son and a daughter. Her older son appears to have moved out of the family home by that time. As previously mentioned, William had lived in the home of Margaret Addison at Four Lane Ends in Hetton-Le-Hole for several years. As said before, there are no real indications that they were a couple. However, it does seem that William had been interested in Margaret in this way, as some reports suggest he had previously asked her to marry him more than once, but she had refused each time. It was also said that some of the surrounding neighbours saw them as a couple. Perhaps they had been a couple at some point, but were now no longer. What is clear is that in the last couple of years, William had become very jealous of Margaret and her life. Margaret began spending time with a local miner known by the name of Andrew Simpson, and he had been visiting her home for quite some time, possibly for around a year. I have no doubts that William would not have been happy about this, but perhaps thought it would come to nothing. It was said he had heard the couple laughing together and that this had upset him. Towards the end of September 1891, Margaret made it known that she intended to marry Andrew, and it seems that it was also around this time that William had lost his job and was no longer bringing money into the home, and had also allegedly taken to drinking rather a lot. So she had asked him to leave her home and find somewhere else to live. Whether William intended to leave or not is unclear, but he had not actually done so, feeling that he had claims on some of the household goods. It is at this point that the story gets a little confusing, with two very different versions of what was actually happening with Margaret and Andrew on the day that Margaret was killed. I will try to cover both versions and hope that it will make sense. On Saturday, the 31st of October, William was at the home of Margaret, where, according to some reports, he had taken some goods from the house and sold them, and had returned to get washed and shaved. It was at this point that he overheard Margaret saying she was going to catch a train to visit her mother in Spennymoor, and that Andrew was going with her. For some reason, William then decided that she was on her way to get married. He then threatened her and told her that there would be a funeral before a wedding if she left the house that day. However, to add to the confusion part of the story, some articles state that she was actually on her way to Hetton Village Church to get married, and that Andrew would be meeting her there. But at the inquest into Margaret's death, her son denied that she was getting married that day, unless perhaps he knew nothing about it. So was this her wedding day or not? And if indeed it was she getting married locally or in her mother's hometown of Spennymoor? This I really can't answer, but we'll continue on to what happened next, using the more popular version of that time, that she was heading to the train station to meet Andrew Simpson and then visit her mother. It would seem that after William had threatened Margaret, she still decided to leave the house and head off to meet Andrew at Hetton railway station. It seems she did not think anything of William's threats, which is perhaps a little odd, as some reports mention that he had previously threatened her with a revolver, and had also once told her he would shoot her if she married someone else. It is also alleged that he once told her that he had stood over her bed one night when she was sleeping with a hammer in his hand, but had decided not to hit her with it. He had also once told a friend if he did not marry her, then no one would. He was clearly jealous of her relationship with Andrew, but perhaps Margaret did not expect him to actually do anything, feeling that he cared too much for her to actually harm her. Hetton-Le-Hole station was on the aptly named Station Road, which was very close to Four Lane Ends where she lived. It was a short walk uphill to the station from her home. The most popular newspaper articles of the time suggest that William followed her as she made her way up Station Road, and it was there that he confronted her. He does not seem to have said very much, just taking hold of her by the shoulders and pointing his revolver at her and firing 2 shots at close range. Both shots hit her in the head, and it is said that she died instantly. Many people seen this happen, however it seems there was no need to confront William about what he had done, as he calmly walked to the police station, which was close by, and handed himself in. It's not clear if Margaret had made it as far as the railway station or not, and although one article did suggest Andrew was with her at the time she was shot, it seems he wasn't, as I have not been able to find any reports of him actually being there at the time, and also William had said he would have shot him too if he had been able to, which also suggests that he was not there. The police officer in charge of the station, Sergeant Cartwright, was out at the time William arrived, but his wife was there. She was easily able to take the gun from William and lock him in the cell until her husband returned. He did not resist at all, and it seems he never had any intention of trying to escape. The body of Margaret Addison was examined by Dr. Adamson before being removed from the scene for the inquest. At the inquest, it was stated that 1 bullet had pierced the brain of Margaret Addison and that her death had indeed been instant. William Johnson was neither present nor represented at the inquest, although there is no clear reason why, and a jury returned a verdict of guilty of willful murder, and William was committed for trial at a later date. At the trial, the court was crowded, as was often the case in those days, as trials for murder often drew many people to hear what had happened and to hear all of the information relating to each case. People of the Victorian times seemed to have a strange fascination with murderers. The clerk of the court read the details of his charge to William, and he was asked if he was to plead guilty or not guilty, and he replied in a firm voice simply, "Guilty, sir." His lordship then asked if he wished to be defended by counsel, and William replied he did not. His lordship then went on to ask if he totally understood what this meant, and William replied, "Yes, sir." The clerk then said to William, "You have confessed to the crime of wilful murder. Have you anything to say why the court should not pass sentence of death upon you according to the law?" And William did not reply. The judge then proceeded to say, "John William Johnson, you have pleaded guilty to the crime of wilful murder. I have no doubt that had you pleaded not guilty and a full trial had taken place, that you would still have been found guilty of wilful murder based on the evidence available. It seems to be a very simple story. You were driven by jealousy, and you decided that the woman you shot should not be married to any man other than yourself. I can hold out no hope to you that the sentence of the law will not be carried out, and implore you to make use of your remaining time on earth to prepare for the great change that must shortly come to you." The judge then sentenced William to death by hanging, and that his remains would be buried within the grounds of Durham prison. The execution date was set for December the 22nd, 1891. William then saluted the judge, who bowed in reply, and he then turned and walked firmly from the dock. As was quite unusual for the time, no effort was made to commute the sentence to a prison term. During his time in Durham prison, while awaiting his fate, William was visited by Thomas Stewart of Merton Colliery. Thomas was not a relative, but had known William for many years. William was said to be calm and resigned to his fate, but he had confessed to Thomas that had he met him, Thomas, that fateful day, he did not think he would have done the dreadful deed. He asked Thomas to remember him to all his friends, and he also said that he was prepared to die and had made his peace with God. It was stated that William had no relatives. The children from his previous marriage had been his stepchildren, and it is to be assumed that they had no wish to visit him. The night before the execution was said to be a quiet one for William. There are no reports of him not sleeping or being disturbed. In fact, it is stated that he went to sleep around 9 p.m. and slept soundly until 6 a.m. in the morning, when the chaplain visited him. It is also said that he did have breakfast, but not what he had. There was no need for the chaplain to ask if he confessed to his crime, as he had already done so. Just before 8 a.m. he was taken to be pinioned, which means his hands would be tied at the wrists. It was a cold and frosty morning, and William is said to have shivered slightly when first entering the outside yard where the scaffold stood. It was said that he then walked calmly and firmly towards the gallows, and that as the cap was placed over his head, his final words were, "O Lord, have mercy upon me, into thy hands I commend my spirit." The drop fell, and John William Johnson had paid the highest price for his jealousy of Margaret and her lover Andrew Simpson. His death was said to be instant, and Billington was the executioner. The body would be left for 1 hour before being removed and taken for a simple burial within the grounds of Durham prison. I hope you have enjoyed this sad and tragic story. What are your thoughts? Was Margaret indeed on her way to be married, or was she just visiting her mother and William's jealousy led him to think otherwise? Or was the wedding story simply made up by locals or local papers to make the story sound better, to sell more papers? Even in those days, an interesting headline was needed by the press. I know that I have considered the idea that it was indeed her wedding day, and she was trying to keep it quiet as she was worried how William would react if he knew about it. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have enjoyed this story, please do give it a like and please do subscribe to the channel if you would like to hear more stories like this one. Thank you all very much for watching.